I'd like to welcome all of you to this morning's practice. This little club that we have, which simply provides us with a space in which to sit and breathe together, if nothing else. Just rest. I know we've just gotten up, we've just awoken up from a night of sleep and slumber. And in many ways, beginning the morning in this way is almost the perfect doorway into the day. Because the sleep that we get at night, you may not see it as a part of the practice. But it does play a very important role in our practice. Because in many ways, sleep is the process whereby we do enter into a meditative state. Yes, it is a meditative state where we lose that awareness of our body. At least I hope you do. It can be a little bit different if you have chronic body aches and all that, but sleep is that relief that we get from our constant thinking process. But one of the most significant differences between the sleep that we have at night and the practice that we are embarking on is simply our level of awareness and consciousness. And this process where we sit together and breathe together in an awakened state is where we begin to consciously notice those gaps that appear as we use the various tools which will help us to slow our thought process down. And that's all we're looking for. If that, we're not going to aim for the mind to totally stop its movement. Our objective is not for enlightenment or absolute silence during the sitting. It's a lot more easier than that. We just want to feel a little bit better. And I don't know what your surroundings are like. don't know if you can hear voices or footsteps, traffic outside your window. Or even during the practice, if an alarm goes off or you find something distracting or disrupting your practice, I'd like to invite you to be playful about it, not be too serious about it. And what I mean by this is to simply remind yourself that this practice, many teachers, many facilitators call it the art of allowing. And that includes the allowing of all these sounds, those bodily sensations that you may find arising within and around your body. And then perhaps the most challenging part, and those thoughts that seem to continuously arise. For most of us, that is. And so we remind ourselves that our practice today is not to wrestle these thoughts down. Which is what we often do because we more often than not identify ourselves as our mind. We believe ourselves to be the mind with its various thoughts, which make up the beliefs that we have. And most of you have practiced with me before, so you're beginning to understand the nature of the mind. How it's very rarely in this present moment, where we are right now. I mean, where you're sitting, where this point, this moment, where you are listening to my voice, sitting here, feeling the temperature around you, feeling the fabric of the clothing that is interacting with your body at this particular second. This is the now, and the mind is very rarely aligned into this moment. It's more often than not in the past. Perhaps even this morning, just a few moments ago, 10 minutes ago, you might have been having your breakfast, you might have been feeding the pets. And then there are the accumulated thoughts from yesterday and day before and last week. And all that we've accumulated over the years on this planet, in this form. Each one of us having a story worthy of a book. with its ups, with its downs. And each one of these stories will bring with them a storyline. A storyline which carries with it its own unique momentum. Each one of those experiences powering the mind, stimulating the mind. Some of these experiences involve the news, the media, the social media, which we find ourselves so exposed to these days, which begin to paint images of a future. Sometimes pleasant, and then we feel hope, we feel good. And some of these images a little bit bleak and upsetting, and then we feel helpless, upset, worry. And so we observe how it's the nature of the mind to either dwell in the past or completely jump ahead of us into that unknown future which could never happen. A moment ago we were sitting here, we were talking about the current situation and how the skies seem so much more blue. The birds are singing. We find our bodies sitting here in front of these devices, practicing together. And so in this moment, things feel pretty good. Even that past that we referred to a moment ago, it seems as though that past, every single one of those experiences appear to have led us to this point. This particular point. It's very important to distinguish between the circumstances of this moment and this exact moment. The circumstances would include your relationships, your job security, and all those other details. But what we are interested is this particular point in time, almost like the tip of a needle, touching down at this moment. And when you find yourself landing in this moment, it's an experience that happens from moment to moment. to moment. You might see the perfection in this moment, simply because as you release the past, as you release the future, you begin to find that you have nothing left to compare this moment to. And so this moment becomes a new moment. And then it becomes a new birth. And then you find yourself releasing. Almost as though have you ever got onto an aeroplane or a train carrying a heavy piece of luggage? In many ways, this practice is symbolic of such a journey where you enter into this moment with one piece of luggage, a heavy piece of luggage consisting of all those past memories, impressions. And then on the other hand, all those expectations of the future. Those good expectations, they make the bag a little bit lighter. And then those scarier, more bleak ones, they add weight. And then as you enter into this moment, very much like that mode of transportation we were speaking of, the train or the plane, you forget that there are luggage racks above your head, upon which you may quite easily store these pieces of luggage. So you don't have to sit on your seat with the luggage on your lap or on your head, which is what we often do. And so let us put down this luggage. We don't need it right now. And like a packed bag, with everything neatly folded, the night clothes in what's one section, the glamorous, beautiful pieces of clothing in another, and then the casual clothing in the middle. At the end of this practice, we might be in a better position to recognize how nicely everything has been arranged inside of this luggage, so that we may choose what we wish to wear. And so the luggage is not our enemy. We know how useful our thoughts can be. All those, if you were a chemist at this time, if you were somebody working in the pharmaceutical industry, everything you've learned from those textbooks becomes relevant in finding a vaccine for this virus that the world faces right now. And so the mind doesn't become an enemy, it becomes a tool with which to create this vaccine. And in the same way, we're here to be friends with the mind. We're not here to treat it like an enemy. But we're here to perhaps step outside of the mind so that we may begin to recognize the different thoughts that we have packed into this metaphorical piece of luggage, choosing the pieces we would like to wear at the appropriate time and disregarding those which we have no use for. We smile as we begin to realize how sometimes in the middle of winter we've accidentally chosen a thin piece of linen and felt very uncomfortable. And then on a warm, sunny summer's afternoon, we've accidentally picked up a very thick and uncomfortable winter coat, and again found ourselves feeling extremely uncomfortable. But this is a practice. Where we collect ourselves. Where before we take our seats on this vessel, we place these burdens, these heavy pieces of luggage on these compartments that have specifically been provided so that we may enjoy this journey more fully, more completely, the scenery outside. If you like, you could have a lock for the overhead compartment so that you know your possessions are safe. No one's going to touch them. I know how the mind works, because mine does too. Always keeping one eye on the compartment to make sure it's safe. But here everything's safe. Because this is our journey. We're the only one taking this journey. We're not going to concern ourselves with the other passengers, whether or not they keep their luggage in these compartments. Of course, once our hands are free, as we find ourselves present in this moment, we find ourselves in a better position to assist them should they need assistance. which is what I know most of us here in this space would like to do. We do care very much for the people around us. But we remind ourselves that this is a practice. We're all here today at this moment to be kind to ourselves. And so arriving in this space, it is very significant. It is very important because it has become an opportunity for ourselves, for us to give our minds that much needed rest that it deserves. We all know how to give our bodies rest, although many of us often forget to do so as we serve those around us. But I bring you back to that metaphor of the journey on a plane. If you've ever traveled by air, you would have noticed how before the journey begins, the cabin staff, they tell us, especially if you're traveling with children or vulnerable, somebody who's a little bit vulnerable, an elderly relative or someone who might be disabled, the first thing they tell you is that in the plane, if anything were to go wrong, if the oxygen masks were to be released, they advise you to place the oxygen mask first on your own face so that you can breathe. And then the child, that elderly relative, that disabled friend, this is a very significant lesson, a metaphor, which forms the core of this practice. Because in order to help those around us, in order to uplift, bring hope to those around us, we should often remind ourselves to be kind to ourselves, to give ourselves that space to recover, to rest, to replenish our energy levels, which is what you're doing right now. And even after this practice, I know I very rarely ask you to look into the future, but identify one thing that would be that oxygen that would somehow energize you. I know some of us, we have children, we have pets, we have husbands, we have parents we need to look after. But what is that one thing that would somehow give us that sense of relief, that rest, that nourishment that will fill our lungs with that oxygen, which would then allow us to serve more effectively? That is perhaps an exercise that you can contemplate on and take with you. Because as we find ourselves more nourished, as we find ourselves more rested, we will also find the services that we provide, the language that we use, so much more kinder, so much more effective in its timing. And so much more wiser. Speaking of oxygen, our breathing process, that process whereby our lungs somehow extract the oxygen from the space and the air around us. And also, when carried out with a higher degree of awareness and consciousness, becomes one of the most precious tools with which we might use to ground ourselves into this moment, outside of the thought process, where we can simply observe our thoughts, perhaps with a knowing smile, with a deeper understanding of its movements. And so I would like to invite you to direct your awareness to the skin that you can find within your nostrils, within your noses, around your nose, the upper lip, the insides of the nasal passage, and wherever else you may be able to sense the movement of air as it enters and as it leaves. The nostrils, see if you can invite, not force, invite the mind to latch on to the multitude, the various sensations that the body is experiencing through this region. The mind almost always, like a little child, it always seems to need something to occupy itself with. And for these brief few moments, we'll give it the breath to play with. The breath is its toy. And so we'll ask it to explore the temperature of the air. Do you notice how my voice is guiding you to treat the mind as an entity separate from the being that you are? Again, that's what this practice is about. Coming to recognize the mind as a tool, a piece of luggage, anything you'd like to call it, as long as there's that recognition that it is separate from this witnessing presence that we are tapping into at this moment. And so what is the temperature of the in-breath? The reason we're getting the mind involved is because in this present state, there is only a sensation. It's neither cool nor warm, neither good nor bad. All those meanings arise only once these sensations get filtered through the mind, which is what happens almost continuously throughout our days. Sensations, vibrating air molecules around us that we call sound. Again, there is no sound until it gets translated through the mind. Because the mind has memories of what loud is, what soft is, what good is, what bad is, what music is, what silence is. All of that learned from the past, that piece of luggage we were talking about with socks and shirts and coats and all kinds of different memories. And so we observe this unfolding. Back to the breath. How deep into the nasal passage can you still experience this flow? What if you were breathing for the first time? Would you be more curious? Would you be more interested? Because if you were breathing for the first time, which is what this practice invites you to be, you would have released every previous breath that you've ever taken. Leaving you with only this breath, the first breath, the only moment. as it flows in. This time following it down the throat. Perhaps even with the ability to distinguish between the swallowing process within the throat, which is through a different pipe, and then the windpipe that carries the breath inwards. Today we won't worry about the chest, but let's follow the breath down into the stomach, so that you very gradually become aware of the rising of the stomach wall as you breathe in, the ballooning of the inside wall as you inhale, and it's falling as you exhale. Let's focus on the stomach for a little while. So let go of the nasal passage, to the edges of the nose. Focus on the stomach, the rising and the falling. Observing the unfolding of every breath. From the stillness within and around the stomach. Comfortably. With ease. Allowing all these words that somehow soothe and somehow seem to equate with the ease of breathing, treasuring every breath, cradling it, like the newborn that it is. And then as you release the breath, following it up your throats, down the nasal passage, and as it exits through the tips of the nostrils. Its temperature, the speed at which it travels, its level of humidity, which has somehow quite significantly changed. Breathing out for the first time. Again, if you were breathing out for the first time, wouldn't you be that little bit more curious and more interested in this unfolding? Each breath anchoring you deeper and deeper into the stillness of this moment. we use the word anchor. If you like, you can visualize within your mind an anchor dropping into an ocean. An anchor that's attached to a very long line, dropping deeper and deeper and deeper. Perhaps at the same time recognizing, if you're a visual person, we like visualizations, don't we? They help us understand this abstract, invisible entity called the mind, which sometimes seems so real. But let us use the breath as a bridge. Almost like a tunnel that joins two different worlds, connects two different worlds. One, this world outside of us, like that space at the tips of your nostrils, your upper lip, where you can feel your breath moving in and out, which somehow seems connected to the space around you, the room you find yourself in, the buildings, the streets, the planet. So much movement. It's a world consisting of matter, energy constantly changing from one form to the other. Changes, young, whatever middle age stands for, old, death, regeneration, birth, a cycle that seems to continuously go on, like day turning into night and night into day, like the changing seasons, from spring into summer, into autumn, into winter, with the different sounds. So much change in this world outside. So much beauty as well. Like the surface of the ocean, we notice the waves. And let this world outside of us, this world of change, represent the surface of the ocean. Countless waves of all sizes, of all shapes, of all colors. And sometimes, you know those worries that we spoke of at the beginning of this practice? That stress, those concerns, those memories. Have we been experiencing them simply because we've been attempting to control the waves? There are too many variables, aren't there? Too many changing conditions, and it gets very tiring. You control a wave here, another one pops up over there. And then on top of the waves there are the winds and the clouds and sometimes the storms, which completely change the shape and the velocity and the speed and the height of the waves. And then we bring ourselves back to the breath. And we turn the breath into that anchor that a moment ago we dropped into this ocean. And we follow it. As we breathe in, we follow the line and the anchor deeper and deeper as we breathe in into the stillness of the ocean within. Breathing in. This time as deeply as you can. Breathing out as slowly as you can. With every breath in, becoming aware of the stillness. The silence, and the ease at which we have been able to gain access to this line still aware of the movement. As you look up from beneath the surface of this ocean, you look up and you see the movements. You feel your bodily sensations. You hear the sounds around you. You notice the clouds. Shall we let the clouds represent our thoughts? Of different shapes, different sizes, different shades, colors, speeds. And then we breathe in and we find ourselves no longer moving with the clouds, no longer being carried by the waves. We notice the space in between the clouds. We notice the ever-growing space between that which we are And those thoughts that we once identified ourselves with, space that seems to continuously grow into the gaps, even the gaps in between the clouds, becoming wider and wider until sometimes you're just left with the emptiness of the blue sky, or the vastness of the dark sky. Devoid of the clouds and just the beauty. Perhaps even the different constellations, the shapes, the lights. That somehow seem to represent hope, the solutions to some of the challenges that we experience in our day-to-day life, seeming so much more clearer as we step outside. And into the stillness. I'm going to remain silent for a short while, but I'll just ring the bell. And if you like, you can imagine a still lake with little pebbles falling into its center, causing ripples to flow across the surface. Mentally, I would like to invite you to invite these ripples, these sound waves into and through your bodies. If for no other reason than to simply loosen any pockets of tightness, of stress, of tension that you might still be holding within your body. And at the same time, holding on to that line, that anchor that somehow seems to keep you grounded into the stillness. Within this ocean. Your shoulders dropping. Your muscles loosening themselves. Your immune system the only thing that appears to be resurfacing. It's almost as though within that anchor that you have deep within this ocean of stillness, there is a little pocket of air in the form of a balloon that's somehow being released, and it makes its way upward with ease, with comfort, and a sense of allowing. Absolutely no effort is required as it makes its way to the surface of this ocean, and we'll allow this balloon to represent our immune system. Which almost always wants to surface, wants to help us, wants to heal us, and wants to protect us. A balloon that we sometimes hold underneath the surface of this ocean through our worry, through the stress that we experience. But now we let go. As these sound waves, these ripples travel through our body, unlocking, reaching into the very depths of our bodies, passing through the organs, the muscles, the nerves, the blood cells, and in a moment, the final bell. And those of you who know me, you know I call it the final bell. But it simply symbolizes the beginning. The beginning where the world turns into our classroom. Where we observe, we notice, and perhaps we learn, not taking any of it too seriously. as we experience the world from outside of our thoughts, whenever we can, not always. That's why we remind ourselves, we call this a practice. With that, I shall leave you, lovely people, in peace. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really did enjoy that practice. Thank you for bringing your different energies and momentum to this practice, which made it what it was.